Hello everyone and welcome back to the PlayStation 2 Retrospective, a show that only comes around every once a fucking year it seems, but 2021 is the year that changes. And to kick this year off, we're going to be talking about Bully, a game that literally everyone has heard of, whether you knew somebody who played it or you heard about it through the grapevine due to the ridiculous controversies. I personally heard about it because a lot of my family members not only owned PlayStation 2s, but also had at least one GTA installment for the system. And in 2006, my older teenage cousin got a copy of Bully, which obviously came from the same publisher, that being Rockstar. See, but we're talking about 06, so I was 6. I wouldn't actually play the game for myself until just this past week, 16 years later on the Xbox 360 with the Scholarship Edition remaster, which does have its fair share of issues, and we will talk about those later on, but it is, at least for the most part, the same game as the original PlayStation 2 exclusive. So Bully was actually developed by Rockstar Vancouver, who have never touched the Grand Theft Auto franchise. They only made 4 PC games before Bully, back when they were known as Barking Dog Studios, and 1 game after it, until the studio and all 35 employees were merged into Rockstar Toronto in 2012. So at its base level, yes, Bully is technically Grand Theft Auto for teenagers, down to a pretty sizable amount of assets and features being recycled from San Andreas, but it's also reminiscent of Japanese games, like Persona 3 and Yakuza, 2 games that were released around the same time period. I honestly really think that if you've played San Andreas but want to dabble in the Persona series, or vice versa, then Bully would be a really good transitional game. It's got all the open world shenanigans like races, collectibles, side missions, challenges, and tons of weapons, but it's also got that Persona flair that the fans love, like classes, dating, NPC requests, customizable outfits, fun boss fights, and an amazing soundtrack. But what's really so mesmerizing about Bully is that it never falls short or gets boring. Let's just say that from the first GTA game I played to now, I've experienced an uncomfortable amount of open world games, with the majority of them being Rockstar titles, and a big personal problem I have with that genre is the feeling of the world being so big with nothing to do whatsoever, or there being too much stuff to do, but it has very little enjoyment value, and it's just another distraction there for distraction's sake. And this is where I think Rockstar Vancouver may have accidentally had the same design philosophy as Yakuza. That franchise has always been set in small yet dense cities. So while you can still easily traverse the map in about 5 minutes in one of the most recent installments, you can just as easily spend over 100 hours doing a variety of tasks or just playing minigames. And Bully is the same way. While it's not as small as Yakuza, nor does it have anywhere near the same possible playtime, it does have the same general design structure. The most prevalent unique mechanic in Bully is the day-night cycle. Sure, this mechanic has been used well before this game, but since you're a student at a boarding school, that clock has a bigger importance in your life in Bulworth. You have to avoid all cops and prefects from 9 AM to 3 PM since you're supposed to be in class, except for holidays of course. You cannot go into the main building after it closes at 6 PM, otherwise you're trespassing. Curfew is at 11 PM, so you have to avoid the cops and prefects again. But don't stay up too late because Jimmy has to go to sleep before 2 AM or he'll pass out and get robbed. At the beginning of my playthrough, part of me wished it was a little bit more like Persona, where time only passes after you decide to do something, whether it be studying, chores, or meeting up with your girlfriend. But the difference is that the Persona games are RPGs, where what you do has a long-lasting effect on your playthrough. Plus, all of those games have a finite amount of days, where in Bully, the system is actually really impressive and constantly keeps the player on their toes. Because that clock doesn't stop for anything, there's never really a dull moment in Bully. Plus, seasons only change once you complete certain missions, and even after the story is completed, the post-game is literally called Endless Summer, so there's really no rush to do anything whatsoever, like the classes. I love how classes are done in this game. Instead of essentially being a cutscene or a short quiz that you can easily look up online, Bully actually has playable minigames that you have to have a passing grade in order to complete the class. Some can be done in your sleep once you figure them out, like art. Some are actually fun brain exercises like English. And then there's some that are ridiculously easy but are only made hard through purposely clunky controls, like biology. Fuck you, when you're not completing classes or running around the city, you're going to be completing the 13-hour campaign. If you've played Saints Row 3 where you go down a linear predetermined path of taking down gang leaders, then you'll feel right at home with Bully. Each chapter is focused on taking over a specific clique, with the first and final chapters being the exception since they're an introduction as well as post-game respectively. There's lots of missions that stray away from the third-person action, like an on-rail shooter mission, tower defense, and stealth. They're just there to break up the gameplay and keep things interesting, but if you don't like them, missions don't last very long, so there is that. Jimmy Hopkins is hands down one of the most enjoyable and relatable characters I've seen in any Rockstar title. While he may initially seem like the titular bully, he's an abandoned kid with a bad home life who just wants to be left alone. But eventually, as a direct result of Gary's betrayal, Jimmy rises from being an underdog and decides to take over the school one faction at a time. Nowhere is Jimmy's moral compass made more obvious than his friendship with Petey, who's gotta be the best right-hand man I've ever seen. Even when Jimmy can come off as a bit of an asshole and Petey gets tired of his shit, there's never any true malice behind his words to Petey, and he'll still protect him when he needs to. By the end of the game, when Jimmy puts in a good word for all of his friends with the headmaster, it's cemented that Hopkins has to be one of the most likable and understandable protagonists in an open world game. And the boy's only 15 years old. But at the same time, yeah, there's some shit in this game that's pretty fucking yikes. Specifically having to do with the scummy shit Jimmy does to the girls, like stealing their underwear and taking racy pictures of them without consent, specifically to the head cheerleader Mandy. There's also an Icarus moment where he gets too big for his britches for like 5 seconds, but he does come to regret these choices and does his part to undo the harm that he caused. Mandy is definitely the best romantic relationship in the entire game, solely because she's the least shitty. Early on, she does have a moment of being an asshole to both Beatrice and Jimmy, but after that, she's really not that bad. And her relationship with Jimmy, besides the aforementioned pictures, is pretty understandable. I guess Zoe was cool too, but she's not in the game very long. I think she's only in like 4 missions. Plus, I accidentally skipped a couple of her cutscenes, so I had no clue what the fuck was going on. And the rest of the girls can be yeeted into the Shadow Realm, especially Lola. Me and my homies hate Lola. Gary is a really interesting antagonist, but had so little screen time that it was ridiculous. He was present for the entirety of Chapter 1 until his betrayal at the end. Then he's constantly mentioned throughout Chapters 2 and 5 until the final mission where Gary shows his face again. But as the game goes on, Jimmy begins to care less and less about Gary's existence, which is how he was able to turn the entire school against Jimmy on 2 separate occasions. There's a pretty funny running gag where Petey constantly tries to remind Jimmy that Gary is the main goal here, but besides that, Gary does very little in the actual narrative. I wish that Scholarship Edition added some more scenes with Gary instead of more classes that give you clothes. Almost akin to what Kingdom Hearts Final Mix did by adding more Riku scenes. Well, I started down the negative road, so I might as well keep walking. Bully isn't all perfect. There's a few things that I wish were changed for the remaster, or just were never added in the first place. Something that really gets under my skin is the clunky saving process as well as the lack of any real checkpoint system. The only way to save is when it's done manually in your room. This may seem like a really small thing, but the player has to sleep at some point in the night anyway. We established earlier in the video that Jimmy can't stay awake past 2 AM, and so the easiest way to clean this process up would be for the game to save while Jimmy sleeps, as well as adding a consistent checkpoint system. As is, if you lose a mission, it's a gamble of whether the game's going to restart you at a specific part of the mission, or if it'll just kick you out entirely, forcing the player to backtrack to the original mission marker on the map and start the entire thing all over again. Like, the time you spent on that first try being wasted should be punishment enough, especially in a game with this day-night system. The lock-on is absolute garbage. You cannot lock onto anything unless you're directly facing it, which it's pretty hard to turn around when all these enemies are surrounding you in a tight space. Because of how fucking broken the lock-on is, I've accidentally started fights with random strangers, which is a big annoyance in this game. The camera constantly gets stuck on random things as well, especially with just how tight some of these hallways and corridors can be. This is a big, fat, juicy no-no. Hey, I get it. Some cameras weren't that well done until late PS2, early PlayStation 3. But even then, Scholarship Edition was completely redone in a new engine by a new development team. And there was obviously new content added into this. It's on the fucking box. So let me make it clear. If you can add a new class, then you can fix all this shit. And now we've gotten to the big kahuna. Scholarship Edition is pretty glitchy and buggy. From building textures tweaking out, Jimmy floating or having stretchy limbs, guards disappearing during stealth missions, consistent frame rate issues from beginning to end, clothing textures now look shiny, the textures on faces look fucking terrifying for a 6th gen game, and especially for a 7th gen remaster. The lighting is just constantly popping in, and when it does, it sometimes looks completely wrong, especially at nighttime. Not to mention the added content. I liked the new classes, I didn't have any problems with those, but the new main story missions are really whack. I'm specifically talking about the Christmas Santa side story. This drunk Santa and his slew of missions are really boring. It halts any progress in the story. It has nothing to do with any factions, and after the missions are done, the drunk Santa just leaves to never return. If the rumors that all of this added content is actually just scrapped stuff from the original game are true, then it makes sense that it didn't make the cut in the first place. So, besides some of my complaints, mostly having to do with the Scholarship Edition, Bully is an amazing game, one that deserves its cult following and outcry for a sequel. I eventually had to mention it. As of March 2008, Bully had sold 1.5 million copies while still being a PlayStation 2 exclusive. It's the 106th best-selling PlayStation 2 game ever. You may scoff at that number, but when you look at the 105 games preceding it, that's not a bad place to be at all. After that, there were multiple remasters and emulated ports, but that was it. So why? Why wasn't a sequel made? Well, in the past couple of years, a significant amount of stuff has happened. There's public claims made by an ex-Rockstar employee about a Bully sequel being developed all the way back in 2009. Just a year after hitting that 1.5 million mark, it was supposedly going to be about Jimmy Hopkins' summer vacation at his stepfamily's house, but it was reportedly scrapped multiple times, with the most recent being at some undetermined point in 2017. There was also tons of fake gameplay screenshots made by some guy on Twitter, which you're seeing on screen right now, as well as a mention of the sequel existing by the game's composer, Sean Lee. According to GameRant.com, and I quote, "In 2011, Rockstar executive Dan Houser revealed that although Bully was popular at the studio, Rockstar had a policy against releasing sequels too soon after their originals." End quote. I'm assuming by the word originals they mean the first installment in the franchise, because if not, you have some explaining to do. In 2013, Dan Houser said that he had, quote, "many different ideas for a Bully sequel," end quote. And that was the last official statement from anybody at Rockstar on the topic of Bully 2. Yikes. Honestly, while I want to have my hopes up, it's not unique for Rockstar to wait for some time to make sequels. It's been 15 years, and the original dev team has merged into a completely different branch. It doesn't matter if you want to admit it or not, the original team is part of the reason why Bully came out as good as it did. But because of fan outcry, I really think Bully 2 will reach infamous status similarly to Half-Life 3. Go anywhere on the internet that's even closely related to Bully, and you'll find constant complaints about Rockstar not making the sequel. New theories are being uploaded every single day. No BS, I got notified about one while recording this video. Did Bully 2 ever exist? Will it ever come to be? Who knows? All I know for sure is that if a Spider-Man 4 Wii build has been proven to exist, then there's always a chance for anything. Really, at the end of the day, it just shows how astonishing and legendary Bully is and always will be. Frankly, it should have been capitalized on. It should have become a big name alongside Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, and its parent series GTA as a standard for open world gaming. But as is, it's an amazing PlayStation 2 classic that you should definitely play. Although in my opinion you should play the PlayStation 2 original or the emulated ports on PlayStation 3 and 4. I think the Scholarship Edition is fine in the long run, but its quality problems do reflect badly on the product itself. Anyways, that's all I got for you guys. Like, subscribe, and all that jazz. I'll catch you guys next time. Later, kids, and I'll see you in the next episode of the PlayStation 2 Retrospective. In 75 years.
Here we are, boy. Bullworth Academy. Have fun, Jimmy.
Hopkins, you're quite the nastiest little boy I have ever encountered.
Okay, I'm frightened. And I've got a weak bladder.
Hey, Aggie. You can clean my shoes.